Hi guys, my name is Patrick, but you can call me 26, and what we're going to do today is we are going to try and figure out what are some of the problems that you face when you try to use AI to generate code for your iOS application. So we've all been there. You're building your iOS app, you're going along, and you think that maybe you could use AI to do things a bit faster. So one thing you do not account for is all the errors that you might run into. In this video, we're going to look at iOS specific errors that are only related to iOS and nothing about the model's capability or knowledge. Some of them are going to be specific to some of the larger models, but in general, we're going to see problems that only iOS developers would face. For this example, I'm going to look at the three main models, which I think are OpenAI, that's ChatGPT, and we're going to look at GPT-5, Gemini, which is a model that I use the most, and Claude, of course. So on we go to problem number one, the very first problem that we encounter when we are building with models, right? And this problem is specific to a particular model, right? I have encountered it primarily. It's my primary model to use. I normally use Gemini more than I use the other models. I like its large context window. And the particular problem is that Swift, as you know, is very finicky when it comes to the rules of its language. So, for example, if you are putting a space, you have to put equal space between the various equal white space between both sides, right? You have to put commas and whatnot when you're separating elements and whatnot, right? So when you write a lot of code with Gemini, particularly when you generate a lot of code, if you ask it to build the entire app, right? If you ask it only to build a page, it doesn't do this, right? When you ask it to build an entire app, ask it to do a speech transcriber here, you find that it does put the question mark when it's using it wants to show a microphone here, right? And so for this ternary, it doesn't put an equal space in between, right? So you need to put an equal space, right? And that would solve the problem, right? And it repeats the same problem in the next line, right? So line 35, or rather line 37, one more line, it repeats the same problem, right? And then it does the same thing again on the background here, right? So it's not really good, in particular at this specific moment when I'm talking about this, which is 10th of October. Gemini is not really good at doing ternaries, right? It sort of messes up many of the ternaries, right? And other thing it does is trying, instead of separating elements, it leads to a problem to it thinking that you're supposed to separate items, right? So this is and it does this a lot across the application, right? So you can find that in this particular app we have corrected this ternary, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, and it's really popular, right? 3. You find that there are 3 problems with the ternaries because it has chosen to use ternaries there. And problem would be where it says error message is not nil, view model error message. This must be consistent white space on both sides, right? So you have to put white space here. So the same problem with the ternary, just a lack of equal white space, right? So it has inconsistent application of white space. And this is a problem that particularly affects Gemini. Now, the second problem that you can encounter is sometimes when you ask it to do something, it may forget and convert your file into the project build file, right? So this is what our content view is after we asked it to do something, right? So in this case, in particular, it has come and converted our content view into this file, which, if you've never encountered, is what tells Xcode how to build the particular project, right? So it creates a project build file, and then instead of putting it in the correct place, it puts it in place of your actual file, right? So this just tells Xcode how it should build your application, right? So it's mostly for the machine. It contains things like the Info.plist and whatnot, right? So in this situation, it completely ruined your entire app, right? And you have to undo it, right? So you have to hit Command Z and go back to our transcript view, right? So this is what it looked like. And then we asked it to add, we asked it to add our permission to our info.plist. This is what it did, right? It converted it into the build file, right? So in this situation, you find that the application, if it is unable to do what it does, right? And I've seen this problem GPT-5 and also with, right? So Gemini and GPT-5 have this of converting your file into a project build file, right? When you ask it to do something. So that's the second problem. Now for problem number 3, right? It has happened to me more than once, right? Where you give it access to the problem, you set it as an agent, looks through the files, and you ask it to add, in particular, ask it to solve problems and ask it to add the particular permissions for file, right? Permissions maybe for the camera or the audio or whatnot, right? In this case, it will check and say, I checked the project directory and found there is no Info.plist present. This likely causes the problem to fail, right? But if you come to the problem, the actual app, right, this is the code that it told me that it can't find the info.plist. The info.plist is available here. but it cannot find this particular info.plist. So I don't know, the Explorer tool that is attached sometimes, particularly when you're using AI on the application. This only happened when it changed to Xcode 26, right? When you're the previous Xcode, right? It didn't have this problem, but when you move to Xcode 26, it did have sometimes problems. I have encountered it a number of times, and it might be more to do with the search tool rather than the AI, but sometimes the AI and the search tool can't work together so that it can locate particular information plist file, so that you can add certain permissions to your application to allow you to have additional functionality. So for the fourth problem that you may encounter when you're trying to use AI to build iOS applications, right? Now, you would come across a situation where we have moved from iOS 18 to iOS 26, and it's still early days, relatively early. It's only been out like, say, about a month right now as I speak, right? And so maybe you might find that the AI was trained on data from a couple of months ago, right? So the training data that it has been trained on is not aware of iOS 26. And several times you'll run into problems like I can see here, where it tells you that the problem is that the build failed because the iOS deployment is set to 26, which is too high, right? So in its training data, the highest possible iOS version that it's seen is going to be iOS 18, right? So it has not been trained on iOS 26. So when you start a fresh project, right? When you start project, right? And your base is normally set, your base is set to iOS 26, right? Several times when you ask it for an error, it's going to look at the deploy settings and say that problem. The reason that the application is not working is because you're trying to use iOS 26, which does not exist. It has told me multiple times that iOS 26 doesn't exist. Particularly, one popular developer on Twitter has even made a joke about it not knowing iOS 26 exists, right? So this is a very common problem you'll encounter when you're trying to use the particular you're trying to use AI on iOS. So for the fifth and final problem that you might encounter when you try to use AI to build iOS applications is that you will find that it has not yet seen enough examples of the new APIs, right? So in this situation where I was trying to build application, the speech API, I already have the video, right? I tried to build it with completely with AI. It hadn't seen the new speech API, right? So it used the old API to build it, and I kept having to correct it. Find that we do have a bit of a conversation going here where I had to keep correcting it because I thought that since it can, many cases you find that models can scan the internet, right? So they can read the internet and see the examples, right? But despite seeing this, maybe because they do not have access to GitHub, because it would be better if they were scanning GitHub because they'd find more examples, right? They were not able to build this application, and I had to do it myself, right? So if you are dealing with the latest and greatest, if you're dealing with the new APIs, if you're working on iOS 26, right, you will find that the current models as they are, maybe after they are updated and there's another major update, they'll be able to incorporate the corpus of information that is iOS 26 into their training models. They'll be better at working with it. But if you try and use iOS 26 currently, you'll find that often times that is not very helpful since it has not been trained on the data, right? So those are 5 problems iOS developers can encounter when they're trying to build with AI. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, tell me any other problems that you have encountered.